Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get started with our council session today, September 17th, 2019. As we begin all of our council sessions, we're going to start with an invocation by Mr. John F. Mahoney from the Bethesda Friends Meeting. Please rise as you're able.
Good morning. In the Quaker tradition, we will start with a moment of silence. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now we have a presentation of the proclamation. Councilmember Rice is not here, so I think we'll go on to general business, and then we'll come back to the proclamation. All right.
We have an announcement that the council is seeking applicants for the Merit System Protection Board, and the application deadline is September 25th. We have two petitions. One was from residents of the county supporting passage of Bill 1419, the Policing Advisory Commission, and one opposing Bill 2219, accessory dwelling units licensing, and the companion ZTA accessory residential uses for accessory apartments. A couple of changes I just want to note. For the public hearing on Bill 2719, the racial equity bill, that public hearing will be October 29th. It's been moved from October 22nd. Also, please add as co-sponsor Councilmember Glass to Bills 2919, electronic cigarettes distribution, also to the companion zoning text amendment and Board of Health regulation. Thank you.
Thank you. The minutes of July 30th, 2019 were distributed and reviewed. Are there any changes from my colleagues? No? Okay, so those stand, will be adopted. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and go into consent calendar, and I wonder if somebody can ask Councilmember Rice if he's on his way so we can.
They already ran up to try to.
Great, wonderful. All right, let's move on to consent calendar. I need a motion. Moved by Councilmember Reamer, seconded by Councilmember Katz. Councilmember Hucker.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to draw my colleagues' attention to item I, the OLO report on receivership and housing and vacant properties. Several of you might remember, well, anywhere from zero to several of you might remember a bill that passed in the previous council to give our DHCA additional authority to crack down on long-time blighted single-family homes. That law has been working, but not working well enough. We still have some blighted properties, quite a few, where they get a fine from DHCA, and sometimes a judge dismisses the fines, throws it out. We have a lot of blighted properties that have been that way for many years, attracting crime and bringing down property value. So I had asked OLO to look into receivership laws that are used by Baltimore and other jurisdictions to, as one of the tools in the toolbox to address long-time blighted properties in those jurisdictions. And this is a review of what other jurisdictions do. I'm looking forward to reviewing it, and I'll have further discussion now that we have it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hucker. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Madam President. I also would like to draw my colleagues' attentions to two different items. One more generally regarding the confirmation to some of our boards and commissions here in the council, here in the county. As the council president will be introducing her legislation later this morning, I think that as we continue appointing folks to participate in local government in the more than 80 different boards and commissions, we look at those appointments through an equity lens, and as more and more people want to stay engaged, they've been asking for some waivers, and I think it's time that we take a look at those processes to make sure that many more people who want to get engaged, particularly given this day and age of more folks understanding how important local government is, that we look at things through an equity lens when it comes to some of those boards and appointments. Second item is item J regarding the school bus safety camera program. I know there's been many robust conversations about that, most recently Education and Culture Hearing Committee. About 6 weeks ago, before we went on recess, there was a joint T&E and ENC public hearing about that. Still many questions remain. I think that we need to continue drilling down on that and having more conversations, whether they're public or private, regarding contracts. Thank you.
Thank you. And absolutely, the legislation is what's going to guide a lot of these things, so I appreciate you pointing that out. And I want to acknowledge that we are going to take action to confirm different appointments. For example, today we're going to act on appointments to the Alcohol and Other Drug Abuse Advisory Council, Countywide Recreation Parks Advisory Board, Glen Echo Park Partnership Incorporated Board of Directors, the Committee Against Hate Violence, which, by the way, was the very first committee I ever participated in the county as a volunteer, like 27 years ago. Board of Investment Trustees and Consolidated Retiree Health Benefits Trust Board of Trustees, as well as the Pedestrian, Bicycle, and Traffic Safety Advisory Committee. And we really do appreciate everybody that does step up to volunteer and to give us feedback. Okay, with that, all those in favor of adopting the consent calendar, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Okay, so let's go back to our presentation, and today we have a proclamation recognizing Constitution Week by Council Members Rice and Council Vice President Katz.
And I'd like for our guests to come on up. This is actually a unique time in which we're actually doing this proclamation, because I think it's for the first time that since we've been doing this, that it's actually on the actual day that it was signed on September 17th. So, and this is about our Constitution and ratifying our Constitution. And, you know, we try and share some witty facts about the Constitution and some of the very interesting things. I'm actually going to take a more serious side and then let Sydney close with some of the humor. Let's just say that we're in a time right now where people are questioning who we are as a country and where we're going to be going. And I think that when folks penned this Constitution, they wanted to make sure that this was a country that embraced us as a collective society, understanding that we would come together for the betterment of all people. And, you know, it's just very interesting in that folks came to this country escaping what they felt was persecution and not being able to do everything that they could in their home country. And it sounds awfully similar to what we see that is happening with immigration and folks who are immigrating to this country now, who are concerned about the very same thing, them being and their rights being stamped out, their freedoms, their livelihoods, their lives being at risk, and they're fleeing to go to another country to start again, to build up. And so this is a time in which I think we should honor and recognize the great work of some of our leaders who were establishing a great way in which we could build this country, a country that would now be what we see as Montgomery County, a very inclusive and welcoming place for all. It is interesting, and I did just want to highlight one of the things that I think was kind of interesting around the time frame of this Constitution and change, because I think we've changed our zoning code more than the Constitution has actually been changed. I think the Constitution has only been changed 17 times. 27, I'm sorry, 27, not 17. And our zoning code probably about like yeah, something like that. So let me turn to Council Vice President Katz to talk a little bit about the Constitution, and then we'll turn it over to you to say a couple things, and then we'll read the proclamation. All right.
Thank you very much, Craig. And you know, the Constitution is one of those written documents that we just take for granted, and of course we should not, because it is so very important. And they've given us a list of fun facts to discuss. I have 5 that I pointed out. The first is there's actually a spelling error in the Constitution. The word Pennsylvania above the signer's name is probably the most glaring. The second thing that should be pointed out, the Constitution was penned by Jacob Shallus, who was from Pennsylvania. So he obviously didn't pick that up. And he was paid $30 for doing his work, which is, according to this, would be about $830 today. I don't know when this fun fact came out, but I have a hard to believe that it's only be $830 today. The Constitution, as was pointed out, is celebrated on September 17th, and that's the anniversary of the day the framers actually signed the document. And when the Constitution was signed, the United States population was 4 million. It is now more than 327 million, and Philadelphia was the nation's largest city with about 40,000 inhabitants. And then the last one I'll mention is that the national government spent $4.3 million during the first session of Congress from 1789 to 1791. During the last year that George Washington was president of the United States, which was from 1796 to 1797, the entire cost of running the federal government was $5,727,000. It's just interesting how times have changed.
I need my notes too. How many times have you read the preamble to the Constitution? Most of us know about the 7 articles and the 27 amendments, but do you really read the preamble to the Constitution? We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. The preamble of the U.S. Constitution, 52 words, introduces everything that is to follow in the Constitution, the 7 articles, the 27 amendments. It proclaims who is adopting the Constitution: we, the people of the United States. It describes why it is being adopted, the purposes behind this enactment of America's Charter of Government. And it describes what is being adopted: this Constitution, a single authoritative written text to serve as fundamental law of the land. Written constitutionalism was distinctly American, and one that the framing generation considered the new nation's greatest contribution to the science of government. There's a fairly new website put up by the National Constitution Center, and it's a very non-political site. So you can go in and you can get information on the Constitution written by scholars who have spent much time in going through and discussing what the Constitution means. And it's a good place to start any research that you have to do on the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so we're going to read this proclamation, and Sydney, you and I are alternate. Whereas the Constitution of the United States embodies the ideas and principles of our founding fathers, supplemented by the wisdom that has been reflected in our dynamic republic over 2 centuries, and
Whereas September 17, 2019 marks the 232nd anniversary of the framing of our Constitution by the 1787 Constitutional Convention, and whereas the Constitution not only embodies the hopes and aspirations of Americans for liberty and representative government, but also continues to inspire people seeking freedom the world over, and
whereas Constitution Week, celebrated September 17th to September 23rd each year, commemorates the formation and signing of the United States Constitution on September 17, 1787. Now therefore be it resolved that the County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland hereby recognizes the 232nd anniversary of the United States Constitution and urges constant vigilance of county residents in protecting our liberties and rights for future generations of Americans still to come. Presented on this 17th day of September in the year 2019, signed by myself and Council Vice President Katz and County Council President Navarro.
you all should join us for the Constitution,
absolutely.
please. Yeah.
All right. Very important message there. Okay, so now we're going to go on to item number 3. These are interviews for the we're going to interview applicants for Board of Appeals, and we have a great number of candidates. I'm going to ask you to please join us. We have the Honorable Charles Barkley, Mr. Bruce Goldeson, Ms. Mary Gonzalez, the Honorable Seth Grimes, and Ms. Mary Ann Keefe. Good morning. So I have a just set of questions, standard questions, and then we'll open it up for dialogue with my colleagues or any other follow-up questions as well. And I will also mention that our goal is to make the appointment on October 1st. So really do appreciate each and every one of you for applying. So we'll start with Ms. Keefe, and then the same question, we'll just everybody can answer it at the same time. All right. I'll also say for this question, of course, for Mr. Goldeson, obviously this is why would you like to continue serving, because you are there already, so we do make some edits on some of the questions. So question number 1 is, why do you want to become a member of the Board of Appeals? Ms. Keefe.
Thank you, President Navarro, and thank you to all the members for the time that you're allowing to bring us here for interviews. It's greatly appreciated by all of us, I'm sure. I would begin by saying that public service, I think, is in my DNA. All my life, I have been active in various forms of public service, but most especially at the community level. I've lived in Montgomery County for over 30 years, and during that time been extremely active, most recently on the Board of Elections. And I think the lot of the skills and experience that I gained in the 8 years there, I can bring to bear with the Board of Appeals. I know the county well. I understand our communities, our neighborhoods, and I have a keen sense of fairness about dealing with the differences in our community. And I think that's important in terms of the kinds of issues and interactions that are necessary on the Board of Appeals. So in short, I think that my experience and energy and the time that I have to devote to the position is why I'd really like to serve in this capacity.
Thank you, Ms. Keefe. Mr. Grimes.
Thank you, Ms. Navarro, and thank you all for inviting me for an interview. It's an honor to be seated here before you with a bunch of people who are very distinguished. I looked at their resumes and know some of them from before. I similarly am driven by public service in a number of ways, very locally focused. I am driven by public service as a nonprofit volunteer. If you've looked at my resume, you'll see I have extensive experience working in the nonprofit sector in Montgomery County. As a community advocate, a number of you have participated in events that I was a core organizer for over the last month. Majority of you, in fact, one of them just across the street a few days ago. And that is something that really motivates me to try to help people in our community who are more in need of help than people like myself. And then thirdly, in civic matters, I served on the Tacoma Park City Council, but always with an eye to interactions with the county and doing things that actually would scale out to county level. There is legislation that I wrote or co-wrote that has become county legislation, in particular the county pesticide ban. Through this time, I have done my best to interact openly and fairly with county residents. I feel I have a very good sense of what goes on in this county. It would be an honor to serve on this board, and I will just finish by saying that it very much matches my disposition, very detail-oriented. I do a lot of research in order to fully understand the problems that I'm tasked with responding to.
Thank you. Ms. Gonzalez.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. As my Mexican grandfather told me, you can't make more land. So I understand the importance of this committee, and I would like to be a part of serving my county. Most of my work throughout my career, I've been a public servant, and it's been at the federal level, but I still think that's applicable. I've dealt with many controversial issues, but I also would bring a lens to this committee of being a Latina, disabled woman of color, and just knowing the many diverse issues of the county that are pressing right now that I've experienced with my children being at school, knowing the many issues of overcrowding, but also wanting to do the best with your land because your land is so important, whether you're wanting to expand, wanting to do a business, or trying to appeal something. I understand the depth of that. Being an attorney, I can apply the facts of rule to the law. And having applied for variances before in my own life, I know the power that this board has over the community and the importance. Especially I have my own little house in Wensington where there are some mega mansions, there are some ginormous daycare centers, so I know the diverse issues of my county, and I'd like to be more involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Goldenson.
Madam President, thank you. As you mentioned before, the basic reason why I'm here is I would like to continue to serve on the Board of Appeals. I've completed, or within another week or two, will be completing 4 years. It has been a stimulating and exciting experience. It's gratifying, and I want to keep doing it. I like helping the little Harry and Harriet homeowner who have a small problem. I like working with the big corporations to solve their issues about where to build a tower, or can they do this or do that, or build a parking lot or a new driveway, every little issue. And the key thing that I like accomplishing is that I'm giving, or the board, and being part of it, I do, give everyone, corporations and individuals, a last chance to get an issue solved without having to go to regular court, not have to worry about the big issue of going to circuit courts. I've enjoyed doing it. It is also a subject area of public service that's in my DNA, to repeat an expression. It started when I was 9 years old as a Cub Scout, and I did my first Get Out the Vote campaign, and I have never stopped public service. It has been in every level, as a teenager, a young adult, continuous, homeowners association, city municipal planning commission, municipal council, mayorship, board of education. I mean, the picture is there. I am into this and I love doing it. And this Board of Appeals assignment has been very, very satisfying. I do have to throw in one total plug that has nothing to do with that. An issue was raised before about commissions and committees and boards and how they get continued. As the former chairman of your SERB committee, the Committee Evaluation Review Board, I am intimately involved in that. And while I would rather be on the Board of Appeals, even while on the Board of Appeals in the future, I would be willing to help that committee and that chairperson get that operation going, because I believe within a year or so you are scheduled to do that committee again. It's supposed to be every 10 years.
Thank you. Mr. Barclay.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the council, for having us in today. I will say this is a little different for me because I'm used to being up there and not being here. So, but I'm happy to be here. I also want to talk about public service because my whole life has really been about public service. I spent 30 years teaching in Montgomery County Public Schools. I think it's important to know the whole county. I've taught Tacoma Park, I've taught in Wheaton, I've taught in Bethesda, taught in Gaithersburg, and taught in Rockville. So it really covers a good bit of the county. And after kind of finishing up my teaching, I decided to run for office, and I spent the last 20 years in Annapolis. Now, there was a little 4-year-old overlap, so I'm not quite as old as you think. I'm the same as Councilmember Katz here. But I think I would like to continue that public service. I've taken a look at a lot of the boards and commissions, and I think this one is really would be one of the challenging positions to have. I think I've always been known for dealing fairly with people, and as I looked through some of the old cases, I saw a lot of them were not big issues, but some of them were quite dramatic. And of course, the council and previous councils keep changing the zoning rules, so that will affect this committee a lot. I know you've got one later on you're going to talk about. It's going to affect this committee when you do the vaping bill if you pass that. So I'm looking for something to continue my public service. I thought this would be a unique way to do that, and looking at my background, I think I can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to skip to question 3 because I think everybody has done a really great job in explaining your background. So tell us about a time where you have helped to achieve consensus among groups or individuals with differing points of view. We'll start with you, Mr. Barclay, this time.
Thank you, Madam President. Again, many of you know for the last 8 years in Annapolis, I served as chairman of the Alcohol Beverage Subcommittee. And when you think about that, it seems like a little subcommittee. But those two of you have been in Annapolis know what Article 2B looks like. And we did revise the code and put it in better organization, but it still came out to 4 volumes. So as chairman of that committee, I'm just going to talk about one issue that we worked on, and Councilmember Hooker is going to be very familiar with it. When I first took over the committee, we've had wine shipping bills in for at least 10 years in Annapolis. And my goal first goal as chairman was we were going to pass a wine shipping bill. And we had to bring everybody together to do that. Councilmember Hooker had a bill in at that same time, so did Councilmember Ivey from Prince George's, and then I put in a compromise bill, actually using some of their stuff, of course. And the biggest thing we had to do was to work with the industry. And the industry in Annapolis, the alcohol industry, is pretty powerful. They often get their way. We had to work with the retailers, the wholesalers, and distributors to come up with a way to reach a consensus and get that bill through. The hardest part was working with the retailers. And because the retailers was afraid if we did wine shipping, it was going to put them out of business. But we had a lot of wineries starting to grow in the state. And the way the federal law works, if we don't allow shipping in, our wineries cannot ship out. So it was very, very important at that time for expansion of wineries in the state to pass that bill. We finally got the retailers to come on board because what we did in the bill, we allowed shipping from wineries, but not shipping from retail stores around the country. So that got them to work with us on the bill. We worked with Councilmember Hucker. He was on the committee at the same time. Even though I had the compromise bill in, the final bill that we passed was Hucker, Ivy, Barkley, and Davis. So we put Councilmember Hucker first because he had been working on this for years, and we just couldn't quite get it through. Then when it got to the Senate, Senator Raskin had the bill, and basically the chairman of the Senate committee, Senator Joan Carter Conway, basically took our bill and put it into his bill, and it went right through the Senate without any problems. So that's just one issue. There was a lot of issues brought up in the alcohol committee that we worked on and dealt with over the years, starting with getting the craft breweries established, starting with doing distilleries and things like that. So I can tell you a lot more cases if you want, but I think you get a gist of what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Goldenson?
How have I built consensus? It's hard to come up with one because it's a ongoing activity. When I was mayor of Gaithersburg, the mayorship is a non-voting position on the council. There are 5 council members there, and it is important to get them to hopefully all agree about something. And as the leader of those meetings, that was a key effort that the mayorship always has to do. Fortunately, in Gaithersburg, things work very well, and rarely did we have a split. But occasionally there was one. And sometimes you beat your head against the wall, but if somebody was absolutely opposed to something, it wasn't going to change. I don't think this council has ever been in that position. Maybe. But the only other thing that I really worked on hard for consensus was when I was on that SERB committee. Our goal, our charge and goal was to review every committee, justify its existence, and decide whether it should be changed or eliminated or stay just as is. And there were several that we had questions about, and there was no way that the committee was going to say yes to changing something or yes to doing away with it unless everybody agreed. We had to have unanimous decision. I'll work around that word. And as chairperson or as co-chairperson, we had to work very hard at that. And for those of you who know the record of that committee, there were only a few things that survived. But we would not do it unless we had consensus. And it's a goal, it's an operating goal for the leader of any meeting. If you are simply a member of the group, then you work with your compatriots on the committee and you try to convince somebody, bend their arm as much as you need to, but politely.
Thank you. Ms. Gonzalez?
For my entire career, I've worked on controversial issues from police misconduct oversight to alcohol, tobacco, and firearms to the census citizenship question. I came here to serve as counsel for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and with the then 18 members of Congress, we could only have an opinion if the members had consensus. For example, on NAFTA, we could never agree, so we had to agree to disagree. So that was a way of building consensus. And more recently, when I was an attorney at the Department of Justice, I worked on it turned out to be odd because I wouldn't think it would come down to a property rights case, but I was able to successfully pass a bill in the House and Senate, which many senators and congresspeople aren't able to do, but on seizing foreign assets for forfeiture for criminals who are being adjudicated. And it was interesting because the property rights people became very upset because they're like, well, how can this be? But I had to work with them and say, well, it won't be seized until it's fully adjudicated. But it's just interesting because it still has, it still reverberates to this day, as in El Chapo. They're dealing with, do we seize his assets? Does Mexico get them? Does the United States get them? So I've definitely worked on consensus issues, even if it comes to agreeing to disagree, but also moving forward in a way that is fair to all.
Thank you. Mr. Grimes.
Let me first say something that I was going to say in response to the question we skipped, which is that I will not be a candidate for Montgomery County Public Office in 2022. I'm interested in the Board of Appeals, not in a stepping stone. My first involvement in Montgomery County affairs was in 1998 or so, when the county planned to rebuild the Tacoma Park Fire Station number 2 and take 2 adjoining houses in order to build a very broad suburban-y, sprawly is a better word, fire station. I worked with neighbors and then Tacoma Park Council member Mark Elrich to get the county to take only 1 house and rebuild the other one for the neighbors who live there. I've had similar involvements with land use, with Montgomery College, with Adventist Healthcare. For instance, Montgomery College's rebuilding of Pavilion 3 was a great concern to neighbors. Councilmember Reamer is very familiar with that. But what I want to focus on is the Tacoma Park Silver Spring Community Kitchen, which is housed at the Tacoma Park Presbyterian Church around the corner from me. Very soon after I was elected to the Tacoma Park City Council in November 2011, with the support of elders at the Tacoma Park Presbyterian Church, the Crossroads Community Food Network, Councilmember Leventhal introduced a zoning text amendment. I testified before the council in January 2012 after having polled my constituents in the neighborhood, this is in my neighborhood, about their concerns about this. And there were concerns about operating parameters and so on. We managed to pass the ZTA with accommodations that included operating hours, trash hauling, things that you would not normally see in a bill like this. I did a lot of research for this to find out, because this is a ZTA that would apply across the county, to find out what other areas it would apply to. I learned, for instance, that Temple Emmanuel on Connecticut Avenue has a community kitchen, but it is not residentially zoned. Part of the consensus building involved getting my own Tacoma Park City Council colleagues on board. The Fed Committee, Councilmember Leventhal, Chair of the committee, Florine, were very supportive, but Councilmember Elrich on the committee wanted a conditional use. And we built support not to move forward with conditional use, to have an allowed use to have this kitchen, a commercial kitchen in a church in a residential neighborhood, because it was the right thing to do, to open up facilities like this for adaptive use during the day, community serving use. So this was an effort that involved community members, the county council, the Tacoma Park City Council, and I was at the center of it as a member of the core team developing the community kitchen process for 2 years myself before I stepped out of it. And I worked with a very wide variety of stakeholders in order to achieve this consensus.
Thank you. Ms. Keefe.
I have to say, when I first heard this question, the first thought that comes to my mind is I was married for over 40 years and had 4 children, and consensus building was a part of my daily life, usually coming to light at the dinner table. But in all seriousness, to take it to some of my professional experiences, I recently had worked with Microsoft Corporation, where I headed up ethics compliance for the U.S. public sector. I was a contract employee to Microsoft doing that, was brought in to take a situation that was described as the Wild West. You can imagine all the various events that Microsoft does where marketers and salespeople want to give away things and want to take people to meals, and the gifting area was something that was very, very serious. I worked very closely with the attorneys, of course, who set a policy of zero tolerance, and it was my job to get it implemented within the U.S. public sector. And so it involved a lot of very feisty meetings with employees who just weren't used to doing business that way. And I convinced them that what they needed to do was to go to their government clients and explain, we want to be your best kind of partner here at Microsoft, and we can do this by doing the right thing and not just giving away things, but, explaining more what the products are that they're trying to deal with. And in cases where there were certain events that they wanted people to attend that were, important to attend it, where there might be a meal or something, I devised a system of a letter that I created that fit the particular situation and could then be approved by an ethics official in the government agency that's stipulated that, yes, they can attend this sort of event. It really worked tremendously well, and to the point that when I left after 8 years, I wasn't replaced by another person, but rather we had gotten it so implemented into the system and devised a way for people to go online, present their information, and get it quickly approved. So I thought that was a great success. Another very quick one is at USDA, where I had the privilege of being the Deputy Undersecretary and Acting Undersecretary, where we implemented the School Meals Initiative for Healthy Children, which were major changes in the school lunch. First time in 50 years. This was in the 90s. And you can imagine those interests of the consumer advocates, health advocates, nutritionists on one side, agricultural, big business, food industry on the other. And I was really the point person on that, bringing all those stakeholders together and realizing that this could be a win-win for everybody, and in fact it was.
Thank you. Please explain your understanding of the role of the Board of Appeals and how it serves our community. We'll start with you, Ms. Keefe.
Well, I understand that a great deal of the work is in dealing with the variances that come before the board to be determined. And in addition, there are the special exceptions and conditional use, and then deciding administrative appeals. But to sort of put it all into a broad category, I would say that it's really about bringing balance, to provide a balance between the parties that might be, fighting over a particular appeal and the interests of the county, and what you all are doing and have done with regards to the zoning ordinances, and how are these appeals really affecting that. I think you look at it to say, is there damage that's being done? If this appeal is granted, what is the damage? Is there a damage? And does it make sense just overall? I think it's about a sense of fairness, looking at the legality, and understanding, the Board of Appeals is not setting policy. It's quasi-judicial. So you need to work within that framework.
Thank you. Mr. Grimes.
This is I would say exactly the same thing in different words, but so I'll skip all of that and trust that you understand that I understand the basic functions of the board. And I will say that I do recognize this is not a policy-making body. But what I found really interesting was when I thought long and hard about this application because of the commitment that's involved in this work. And I looked into the interviews of candidates in previous cycles, and I found something really interesting in a letter that Stan Boyd, who one of us will be replacing, wrote for his reappointment in 2015, where he talked about how he came to understand how the board interacts, I'm reading, with various county departments such as Department of Permitting Services, Park and Planning, Historic Preservation Commission, with the county attorney and all of that. These are county bodies that I have been involved in, the Historic Preservation Commission, the Planning Board, and so on. And I do see a very wide dimensions to this job and a great opportunity for me to apply the relationships and experience that I have had working with all of these stakeholders and participants, and to things that are maybe not so written down that are very important to its proper functioning. And it looks like a great opportunity for me.
Thank you. Ms. Gonzalez.
I find it to be a very interesting board. It seems to serve as a sword and a shield for county residents. As a shield, it's to preserve the intent of neighborhoods and, to the extent possible, the integrity of the overall plan, and to keep the neighborhoods conforming and to value what was intended, although it's changed a lot, like 1954. I can't tell you all the statutes and different regulations, but it's important to protect and preserve neighborhoods, whether it's historic land use or not overbuilding or building mega mansions. And so that's where the sword comes in, because not everyone needs to have a 5-story house next to my little ranch. So it's a very important board for land use issues, and the 3 major areas: the administrative appeals, the exceptions to try to have a small business in your neighborhood, and then variances are obviously the big portion of the business of the county. It enables people to have the best use of their land, which is important because, as my Mexican grandfather said, you can't ever make more land. And sometimes you get stuck, like I am in Wensington, with a corner lot where I have no backyard. I mean, what if I want to build up? What if I want to build out? But my neighbors might not be keen to that, or if I want to have a daycare or a pet service. So it's a very important land use service to our county and to businesses and to just the proper use of this county. And I think I could do a good service in terms of ensuring the use and integrity of the county going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Goldenson.
4 years on the board has taught me an awful lot, and one of those factors is that I don't know a lot. Critical operation to the board is the county attorney who sits at the dais with us, who keeps us on the right track at the right time, because the board has an administrative role. It is not a planning body. It is not a zoning body. It doesn't say, yes, you can build this structure, or yes, you can build that structure, or you can put that kind of a business in. We are adjudicating at low level what somebody has already applied for, what the Planning Commission has already said yes to, what Department of Permitting Services has already issued a building permit for, and somebody is challenging. That's why we're there, to review that. We are strictly bound by the zoning ordinance. We do not have a lot of leeway, and yet being the body that this average citizen or person or business comes to, at least my role has never been to be the officious government official telling them what they can or cannot do. Part of it is being humanistic. Part of it is showing a little compassion and a little understanding. What hurts in this role is the limit, and one has to understand that, and you get it fairly quickly when you've been to 3 or 4 meetings in a row, you can't always say yes when you want to. Your heart is telling you, oh, I'd like to say yes, they can have that variance. But in fact, legally, they can't. And unless they can come up, or their attorney can come up with some way to get around it, you're stuck. You have to do that. So it's hard to say no, but at times you do have to. The role of the board is to help everybody who has a problem. And sometimes it's a little thing, and for a variance, you don't get a variance just because you need it. You have to justify one of the legal reasons for it. A side setback requirement, a height restriction, how many antennas you can put on a particular tower, all are regulated. And we have to help interpret those regulations and perhaps guide somebody through the process. There are some sessions where we've had an issue that frankly I wanted to go in the back room and cry because I couldn't say yes. I thought it was really needed. And 1 or 2 of those issues, I've learned enough that we have passed through staff messages to this council that there are some zoning issues that really should be re-looked at. Some small little adjustments that could be made that would not hurt a community, but would make it much better for everybody else. How many feet setback? Well, if it's 25 feet and somebody comes in for 24.3, do they have to go through that whole process for 8 inches? You'd hope not. But legally, right now, they do. Those kinds of issues come up. As a member of the Board of Appeals, our job is to help the county, and that means the people, the businesses, and the government make it operate that much more smoothly, that much more efficiently.
Thank you. Mr. Barkley.
Thank you, Madam President. I know as the zoning ordinances are adopted and changed, not only by this council but previous council, you take a lot of time to make sure you have community input before you do any of those changes. So once you pass something, then it's the role of the board to take a close look at those zoning changes and make sure we uphold the council's intent. We're not there to change it. We're not there to pass something else. We're kind of enforcing what you already did. And it's also our role, I think, as a board member would be to educate the community members and make sure they understand what's going on. Is there a way we can help them make it a little bit different? And I think the public expects us to adhere to those rules. If we don't, I think we're in trouble. And I think the public also wants us to look at all these variances, all these exceptions very carefully before we make a decision. So our role is more kind of making sure what you pass is basically carried out and educating the public. Thank you.
Thank you. This question, if you can answer it briefly, I know you've already answered part of it, but in your opinion, is it more important for the board to reach its decisions by consensus or by simple majority? I'll start with you, Mr. Bergman.
Thank you, Madam President. Again, I think it's always better, especially when you only have 5 members, you need to be able to reach a consensus. And I think if you can't get to 5 members to agree, there's something going on. So I would always support that we work with each other and reach a consensus before we make a decision.
Thank you. Mr. Goldeson.
Consensus is valuable, and sometimes it doesn't work. An issue before the board at a recent meeting, it was a motions hearing to decide whether we needed another hearing. And 4 members of the Board of Appeals were convinced in one direction, and 1 member was not, and that was me. I felt there was just something that didn't smell right, and there was no way you could get me to say yes to this one. So I voted no. I had no way I was going to lose, but I wanted my point to be heard. And while consensus is wonderful, if you do have an issue that bothers you, it's your responsibility to make sure it's there and vote the way you actually believe. You don't vote just because everybody else is doing it.
Thank you.
And sometimes that helps you save the issue later on.
Thank you so much. Ms. Gonzalez.
I think in the case of this board, I read the 31 cases so far this year, and it seems like it's a very collegial board, and there wasn't a lot of divergence between members. And I think because it's a more of a transactional situation where you're trying to decide issues for people, that consensus isn't always possible. Although if you're being collegial, it seems like the board reached a lot of consensus. But sometimes majority rule is necessary in order to keep the business of the county moving. Otherwise, you might be mired in continuances and administrative blockages, and the business might not happen. So consensus is nice, but majority rule is probably more reasonable in a transactional situation like this.
Thank you. Mr. Grimes.
I think I watched 9 videos of interviews from previous cycles, and everyone said uniformly we should try to seek consensus, but some people would add that there are occasions where that's not possible. So you can add, well, I can't recall whether Mr. Goldenson was one of them, but you can add several more people who say there's consensus around consensus. So yes, we recognize that that is not always possible, and the Board of Appeals is charged with making decisions, so it has to go ahead and do that even when there is not consensus, and the rules allow for majority votes. And so yes, we should seek consensus, drawing on the expertise of the county attorney, of the hearing examiner, of the staff evaluations, and so on. But where that consensus cannot be found, in probably very rare cases, it is necessary to move ahead.
Thank you. Ms. Keefe.
I am another vote for consensus. I think it sends a much stronger message, obviously, in reaching a decision that way. And I think given the collegiality of a board working together, talking openly, seeking the advice from legal and professional staff, makes that a much more doable kind of thing. And, where possible, we should arrive at consensus. However, I understand there are times it's not possible, but consensus on the whole is absolutely best.
Thank you. All right, the last question is, are there any potential conflicts of interest of which we should be aware? Will you be able to make the time commitment required for service on the board? Ms. Keefe.
I have absolutely no conflict of interest. I have submitted my form regarding the financial disclosure, and I don't have any other conflicts. And yes, I absolutely have time to devote to what I know can be a time-consuming position. I think I demonstrated that during my service on the Board of Elections for 8 years as well.
Sure do.
Thank you.
Mr. Grimes.
I have no financial conflicts of interest, the operative legal definition. I do have, let's call it confluences of interest in certain cases due to immediate family members. My wife's employment for an organization, she's an executive at an organization that's a very large county contractor, and I've had nonprofit involvements that involve fundraising from individuals. For instance, my Shepherd's Table involvement with Washington Property Company, which put up the building there. I believe very much in disclosure and recusal where necessary. I think those cases would be very unusual. I do fortunately have the time to serve. I spend a lot of time already in a variety of community services. I spent a similar amount of time as this job will require when I was on the Tacoma Park City Council as a side job to my regular job, which is as a consultant. At the same time on the council, I was on the board and served as vice chair of the board at Shepherd's Table. And then subsequently I guess that was after I left the council. Yeah, I'll stop there. Yes, I have the time.
Okay. I have a note here as well. So you said that you would be willing to recuse yourself as necessary in your financial disclosure statement. I think you noted that you own stocks in Verizon and AT&T. If necessary, would you be recusing yourself from anything related to that?
Yes, I understand that those companies, for instance, came up in the course of the 5G cell towers, ETAs, and they will come up in other instances. I think those cases will be very unusual, but you do have a disclosure there, and I will seek ethics guidance as needed.
Thank you. Ms. Gonzalez?
I have no conflicts, and my children, I am retired, and my children would love it if I had more to do on the side besides traveling and bugging them. But I would look forward to serving the community in my full capacity,
Thank you
as
so
I
much.
miss being a public servant.
Thank you. Mr. Goldenson?
I have absolutely no conflict of interests. I file the appropriate paperwork year by year, and have had no problems. I don't see any issues at all. I must throw in one other item. I presume the members of the council realize that the Board of Appeals is not in this building as of this past Saturday morning. We moved. There is no meeting this week because the staff is living in boxes. And you're more than welcome to come visit us at our new headquarters at the old Broome Middle School,
Thank you.
starting next week.
All right. All right, Mr. Barkley?
Thank you, Madam President. I have no conflicts, and since I left Annapolis, I'm completely retired. And I would like to take a final minute and just thank Ms. Brown for all her help in telling us what forms, where to send them to, sending us the questions, but she was very delightful to work with. Thank you.
All right, that's good to know. Okay, so I do have a light. Councilmember Jawanda.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you all for being willing to serve and submit yourself through the process. I have a question I'd like each of you to address briefly. As has kind of been undercurrent today, zoning's one of the least known political or appointed entities in the county. I think if you ask the average resident, they wouldn't be aware of what this board is or what it does. But some of you have been outspoken in your political lives or personal lives on zoning issues. And I'd love for you to talk about how you will handle going forward, if you were appointed, public and direct to council comments on zoning issues or legislation or politically charged issues, such as you mentioned 5G, which is still not determined part of that issue, Mr. Grimes. So could you address how you're going to handle that, and if you were to be appointed, those types of issues? And you can start with Mr. Barkley and just go down.
Trying to think if I've ever been outspoken on the type of issues you're talking about. I really have done very little on zoning. I guess I would use the expertise of the staff and the lawyers assigned to the board to make sure we know what we can do, what we cannot do. That's about the best I can answer you.
Okay. Thank you.
Key issue would be, as a member of the Board of Appeals, if I had any doubts about what I could or could not do, I would check with our staff attorney. However, prior or above my being a member of the Board of Appeals, I am a citizen of Montgomery County. And that does not shut my mouth. And if I feel that there's an issue that I want to come out and say something about, I will come out and say it. The only control over that would be if it's anything that has to do with my Board of Appeals role. That's going to be through attorney, and as a member of the board, I probably should be restricted on that. But beyond that, I don't care what the issue is. If I felt I needed to be part of the group, say something, I'm going to come out and say it. Politely and politically correct, but being a member does not shut my mouth.
I think the board is pretty transactional in sort of applying the facts to the law, and do you want a swimming pool, do you want a garage, do you want this, that, or the other? But I think what there might be a vehicle for is this body informing the policy of zoning. For example, I know in my county, or in Montgomery County, there's a brewing issue right now about school zoning issues, like how can we be equitable in resources? And there are many emerging issues like that where perhaps this board could, on the side, inform that sort of policy issue. But as it is now, I feel like what I see from the mission and objectives of the board, it's more transactional, not policy-based. But there is an opportunity for that to occur.
Thank you.
It's a very challenging question you asked Councilmember Joando. Yeah, in the last year, I have testified in favor of the accessory dwelling units zoning amendment, in favor of Councilmember Hucker's bill on solar generating capacity within a given property, the limit there. I have been involved in quite a number of matters that relate to zoning. I would say that in every case it has been, and not just land use stuff, things that are compatible with what you all believe as I know it, in the general direction of what the former county executive used to call the Montgomery County Way. And I am very sensitive to the role that I would play as a member of the Board of Appeals to ensure that I operate with the necessary transparency. I'm very aware of the Maryland Public Information Act and the Open Meetings Act, the requirements there, and I behave in accordance with them and the highest ethical standards to ensure that my personal opinions don't tinge the work that I do in any kind of official capacity. It's incumbent on you to select someone you believe will act with integrity and the highest ethical standards and ability and so on, and I have no qualms putting myself forward as someone who will do that.
Thank you.
And I'd be happy to answer any kind of follow-up questions you'd have about particular involvements.
I certainly fit the category that you were describing as an activist person here in the county for many years. However, I can say nothing ever dealt with zoning issues. That has not been something that I got involved in any way, publicly or personally. Having been a homeowner, my husband and I had two different homes in two different neighborhoods in the county, but we never had any issues. Ethics is, a very strong part of my background. And as a matter of fact, during my 8 years of service on the Board of Elections, I took very seriously the not to interact in any way in anything electioneering, to the point of under my leadership when I chaired the board, we strengthened our bylaws on the point of board members not wearing buttons in support of a candidate, bumper strips, yard signs, and even to the point of political contributions. We didn't write that in the bylaws, but I took it a step further to just make sure that during my tenure I wasn't getting involved in those kind of things. If there were any questions, I don't know, invited to speak at some sort of a meeting or event that they wanted a representative from the board. I don't know if that kind of thing ever happens, but it certainly would be something I'd check with legal counsel on before I'd undertake.
I appreciate it. And you probably saved some money those 8 years, too, when you didn't have to make the contributions. And thank you for the answers. I know it's a tough question, but I think it's important for us to be thinking about that in this specific role. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. Well, once again, I really appreciate you taking the time to apply, and also, thank you for your service as well to our county thus far. We will be making the appointment on October 1st, so we'll be in touch with you as we hopefully deliberate and then make a decision. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay, so now we're going to move on to item number 5, and this is introduction of bills. Expedited Bill 25-19, Contracts and Procurement, Local Business Preference Program established. Lead sponsor is myself at the request of the County Executive. The public hearing is scheduled for October 15th, 2019 at 1:30 p.m. I have lights. Is that for this particular one? I have Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Madam President. I just very briefly wanted to highlight that I know that you and I, who have worked on local business preference through your government operations and have looked at this issue. I know that Mr. Drummer has looked at this issue as well on behalf of the council, and so I'm very intrigued by this new approach that the county executive is taking, and while it's certainly something I support, want to make sure it doesn't fly afoul of some of the challenges that we faced before with the previous legislation we had introduced. So look forward to working with the county executive and our staff on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other lights. So on to expedited bill 26-19, bond authorization. Lead sponsors, myself, council president, at the request of the county executive. A public hearing action is scheduled for October 1st, 2019 at 1:30 p.m. Item C, Bill 27-19, Administration, Human Rights, Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice, Racial Equity and Social Justice Advisory Committee, established. Lead sponsor is myself, Council President Navarro. Co-sponsors are council members Jawando, Rice, Hucker, Reamer, Katz, Albornoz, Fritzen, and Glass. Our public hearing is scheduled for October 29th, 2019 at 1:30 p.m. and also at 7 p.m. And I do have some remarks regarding this bill. It is definitely one of my proudest days as a citizen of our great county. I'm proud to introduce Bill 27-19, Administration, Human Rights, Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice, Racial Equity and Social Justice Committee. This bill is the culmination of an exciting journey that started in April of last year when the former County Council adopted Resolution 18-1095, affirming the Council's commitment to creating a racial equity and social justice policy for Montgomery County. The buy-in on this current council and in our various communities has been terrific. Working as a team of leaders, we have inspired truly courageous conversations at an auspicious time in the history of our nation and our county. I want to thank every one of my colleagues on this council for your collaboration and commitment, for your fine leadership at this crucial time. This bill, which seeks to codify and institutionalize the consideration of norms of equity and social justice in the important work of county government, is a result of our work as a team. Alongside County Executive Mark Elridge, his staff, and our constituents who have provided valuable feedback during the county's community conversations on racial equity and social justice this summer, as well as through the application of our community engagement toolkit that was distributed online and in print to encourage residents to host their own community conversations on racial equity and social justice. The bill, as currently drafted, will do the following. It will establish a racial equity and social justice program. It will establish an Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice in the executive branch. It will remove the Chief Equity Officer position in the Office of the Executive as a non-merit position. This is to avoid duplication. It will require the executive to adopt, through regulation, a racial equity and social justice action plan for the county. It will require each department and office to develop a racial equity and social justice action plan. It will require the executive to submit a racial equity and social justice impact statement to the council for each bill and for each management initiative or program in the recommended budget. It will establish a racial equity and social justice advisory committee and set forth the composition and duties of such committee. It will require the planning board to consider racial equity and social justice impact when preparing a master plan, and generally amend the law governing racial equity and social justice. Recognizing that the implementation of Bill 27-19 rests with the executive branch, this bill also calls for the creation of a structure at the County Council to provide oversight of the county's progress in meeting its racial equity and social justice goals. After today's introduction, in addition to soliciting feedback in writing, there will be an afternoon and evening public hearing scheduled on Tuesday, October 29th, here at the Council. This bill has been assigned to the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee, and we have a session on Monday, November 4th, scheduled, and my colleagues are welcome to attend that session. Also, the plan is to have the final legislation adopted in late November. Finally, I would be remiss if I did not thank all the people who have worked tirelessly to produce this draft bill. starting all the way in January as we set forth on this journey. I want to thank Attorney Bob Drummer, who is our senior legislative attorney, for working closely with Dr. Elaine Bonner-Tompkins of the Office of Legislative Oversight, Tiffany Ward in the County Executive's Office, and my amazing team Navarro, who has been working on this for 2 years, actually. I want to thank them for producing this excellent document that will serve as the space for putting together all that we need to make our county a place that is even more welcoming for all. I will also say that, as has been discussed briefly and in many other occasions, this is not the magic wand, it's not the panacea, it's not the everything. This is the beginning of addressing this issue in a structural fashion, in a systemic way, so that it will outlive anybody who sits in this dais and will guide the work of county government into the future. Again, I want to thank my colleagues for all the work and all of those in the community who have come out to give us feedback. It's been really an extraordinary experience. Councilmember Joanda.
Thank you, Council President Navarro, and I'm glad I get to be the first to congratulate you on this historic day. This is a day that will go down in the history of this county, where we said with a loud voice, it starts the process of that we are going to look back at our history and make sure that we have something in place so that everyone in the county has opportunity to succeed. And I'm really honored in my first year on the council and as with you as president that we're taking this step. And I think it's also very auspicious that here we are in 400 years since the documented history of slaves coming to this country, and we honored that last week, that this bill is being introduced that year. I know it wasn't planned that way, but it worked out, and I think that is not an accident. And so I'm really excited to work with you, continue to work with you and the rest of our colleagues to get this bill right, start the process, and work with the county executive to implement it well. So congratulations, and it's really an honor to serve with you, and really happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Joando. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Madam President. And let me address those naysayers that will certainly start to come out of the woodwork who think that somehow we're taking something away from someone to give to somebody else. They want to define equity as taking away from others to give to someone. The reality is that equity is about opportunity and access. And the reality is that so many in our community for so long have been denied that opportunity and access that they deserve. And what we're doing is we're saying that with our policies that we're going to move forward, that we're going to be cognizant of that we're going to think about that and make sure that all of the things that we put forth promote opportunity and access for all. There's nothing wrong with that. Competition breeds success. It makes us better as a community, better as a society. It makes us more successful. It makes the products and the production that we have even greater. This is making us a stronger and better Montgomery County. This is not taking away from anything. It's giving to all. And I thank you for your leadership. I thank you for really delivering on your promise to our community, but more importantly, to our society. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice. Councilmember Albornoz.
What a really important and special day. I really want to acknowledge your leadership, Council President Navarro, for not just as our term as Council President, but for your decades of service to our community and uplifting all communities. I got into public service for, I'm sure, the same reason all of you did, which is the pursuit of the common good. And not only is there, in my opinion, a moral obligation to pursue the common good, but it makes sense from a financial and economic standpoint, too. When we all succeed, we all succeed. And so I'm very excited to be a co-sponsor of this bill. I look forward to working diligently with our executive branch to ensure it's an enactment and that it is done smoothly. And that it is done in a timely fashion. So we can't wait any longer for this. We've been waiting too long already. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and thank you for your, for your leadership on this and many other things as well. candidly, Councilmember Rice actually said what I was going to say, so I'm not going to repeat that. But I did, excuse me, my voice is not perfect here. I did want to mention, though, the process that we have gone through to get to this point, has, just to this point of introduction, has truly been and continues to be a most impressive one. We started out with the training. I mean, many of us had discussed it, but we started out with the training, the 2 days of intensive discussion, and where people really started to have discussions that many times we normally wouldn't have with each other and with the people of backgrounds that aren't your own background. And it really brought it home to me, and I know to many others as well, that as much as we think we know the process, as much as we believe that we have not been involved in something that we would be ashamed of to be involved in, it really reminded us that there is a systemic issue here, and that we all need to take to make certain that that we are doing everything we can possibly do to change what has happened, whether we did it personally or whether it was done by some other person. It has been done. We need to correct it. We need to correct it in the proper way, and we need to take care of it as quickly as we can. I am proud to stand with all my other colleagues. I think it speaks well of every one of them that we all are co-sponsors, and I'm very proud to sit with all of my colleagues to go through this legislation and to approve it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson?
Thank you, Council President. Institutional problems require institutional solutions, and that's why I really applaud you and your leadership as Council President and your leadership before this current term as Council President on this effort, and why I support legislation to propose specific ways to institutionalize how county government will consider and address equity in everything we do and every policy decision that we make. Achieving racial equity, dismantling the centuries of fierce racism that has structured the way that people think and the way that many of our institutions have operated will be a very difficult and complex task. I don't think anybody up here believes that it won't be. And it will require a committed effort from not just the policymakers here, not just those in county government, but from the public. And that's why I appreciate the effort that the Council President and we have taken to really involve the community in this effort, because it won't be done alone by those of us in elected and appointed office. But because this is a complex issue, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to address it. Just because we can't solve everything doesn't mean we shouldn't try to solve anything. And I really do think that that's what this is all about. And I think that the words of the great Marylander, Frederick Douglass, really speak to what we're doing here, that we have to do with the past only as we can make it useful for the present and for the future. What we're talking about today isn't just about rehashing the past. It's about figuring out how we can use what we know about the past to help to shape a better, a more equitable, a more fair future. And so I look forward to doing that work together. Thank you to the Council President for your leadership. Thank you to all of our colleagues and everybody in county government for doing this. And especially thank you to everybody in the community who has really taken on this issue with the seriousness that it deserves.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer?
Thank you, Council President. I'm really pleased to co-sponsor this legislation with you today. I'm glad we are now in the process of crafting details to institutionalize this this approach. Growing up the son of socially minded, politically active parents in Oakland, California was a powerful experience for me, and it motivated me to put racial equity and social justice at the center of my career and my pursuit in public service. And it is what has animated so much of my work, and here at the council and in previous work as well. So I am really excited by the initiative that the council president has brought to our council this year, and I look forward to seeing how it is implemented. I think that the conversation is, it needs to be uncomfortable, and it needs to have everybody at the table together. So I am really pleased to sign in and support this, and look forward to working on it together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Hooker?
Thank you, Madam President. I'm really glad we're at this day, finally, after a lot of preparation, and I say that even knowing all the hardest work is probably ahead of us. This whole discussion reminds me of the I guess it was Santayana quote about those who don't remember the past are doomed to repeat it. You know, when you're making policy, you have to make a conscious effort to understand how our current county came about. If we're going to make a conscious effort to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past and actually correcting for them and correcting the inequities that they created. That's going to require a conscious and deliberate effort every day. And this whole effort and the trainings and the community conversation that has been part of it, they've been very fulfilling to me personally. I've been working in this space for a long time. They're very important, of course, to my district, where we have unemployment that in many places is 3 times the county average, where we really struggle with access to transit, where we have schools like Eastern Middle School that hasn't been renovated since the 70s, and we have worse health outcomes and lower graduation rates. We're not starting today, though. This is also consistent with anybody who sort of fears where this is headed. This is very consistent with where the council has been headed for a little while, and we're formalizing it and announcing our intent. In the last few years, we've raised the minimum wage. We've strengthened our transit system and made it more accessible to more people. We've strengthened our tenant rights, and we have more plans to do, I think, all those things. We have many more policies that need a hard look, and giving us this lens and announcing our intention to do it formally, I think, is really going to benefit every member of our county, and it's extremely healthy and puts our county in a very, very good light. So I'm really glad we're here, and I thank you for your leadership.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Glass.
I want to echo everyone else's sentiment. Thank you for your leadership, not only during your term as president, but also the years that you've been working up towards this point. And I'll say that from my perspective, it has been most gratifying participating in these conversations all throughout the county and seeing the tremendous turnout in downtown Silver Spring, in Germantown, and in White Oak. The rooms were more filled than I'd ever seen any of those venues before, and that is collaboration. And that is true community input in knowing what we need to do. And so for the long road that it has taken to get to this point, but also for the length of the arc of the moral universe, both are long, both bend towards justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And we do have a press conference when we wrap up here as well, so just reminding everybody as well. Wonderful. So our next item is the introduction of Bill 28-19, Technical Corrections, lead sponsor County Council. Public hearing, action scheduled for October 1st at 1:30 p.m. Also, introduction of Bill 29-19, Health and Sanitation, Electronic Cigarettes, Distribution. Co-lead sponsors, Council Members Albornoz and Rice. Co-sponsors, Council Members Joando Navarro, Hucker, Reamer, Fritzen, and Katz, and Glass. Public hearing is scheduled for November 5th at 7:30 p.m. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Madam President. My comments will be in relation to the package of bills related to this particular effort. We learned earlier this year in a joint work session between our Health and Human Services Committee and the Education and Culture Committee of the shockingly large number of youth now vaping and using e-cigarette products here in Montgomery County. And statistics were updated as recently as yesterday by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. Now 27% of youth across our country are using vaping products, a product that has emerged so quickly on the scene with e-cigarettes that we are just now coming to terms with the potential long-term impacts of the use of these products. And we know that the industry has been targeting through a variety of means our youth and marketing directly to them. And so this council is committed to taking action to protect our most precious commodity, and that is our children and youth. I want to thank all of my colleagues for co-sponsoring this bill, but in particular, Councilmember Rice, who chairs our Education and Culture Committee, who I have had many conversations with about this important issue, and you will hear a little bit from in just a moment. But I do want to acknowledge, I want to thank Amanda Myhill and Mark Hansen for their work on the development and the research. I especially want to thank my remarkable team led by Joy Nurmi and Beth Schumann, Lillian Cruz, and Maida Bayonet, who have been conducting just a tremendous amount of research and looking at national statistics and data, but then also working to build on the coalition that you heard from yesterday at our press conference when we announced this effort. We look forward to a robust conversation, but we also want to ensure that this is just another step forward in addressing a complex and growing issue in this county. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Madam President, and thank you, Chair Albornoz, for your great leadership and your partnership in working on this incredibly important piece of legislation. These three items together are a first step for us in making sure that we can help increase public awareness about the dangers of vaping. You've seen reported in local media over the past few days that people are really starting to understand just how much of a concern this should be for not only the parents of children, but also the general public who continue to vape and think and use it as a secession device, not understanding the risks that they're posing to themselves and their well-being. I will tell you that especially when it comes to our children who are incredibly susceptible with their developing brains as well as developing bodies, so much so that athletes, athletic coaches at both the high school and at the collegiate levels have already started issuing notices to their athletes and telling them not to participate in vaping. How it affects their bodies and their minds. It's one in which we are just starting to now get a handle on the true risks that are associated. Even the moniker of vaping itself is incorrect. We are actually heating an oil-based substance to 450 degrees. This is not water vapor. And I think it's important for folks to understand the science of the technology of this device in that it's actually similar to inhaling an aerosol. And so if you think about how we try and avoid aerosols, we've heard about the dangers of when it comes to some of the inhaling some of the chemicals that are associated with aerosol cans and minimizing your exposure there. This is very similar. And for folks to continue to do it, for the deep breaths in which they take this into their lungs, these are things that are incredibly dangerous. And let's just not forget about the fact that nicotine is an addictive substance that we're exposing our children to, that then they may then go on to utilize other addictive products as well. This is bad stuff, folks. And we shouldn't be putting bad stuff in front of our kids. It's just that simple. And so this is a measure in which we can try and remove these temptations, these bad products that can harm our children out of their hands. And so we're doing our first step in this part by moving them outside of a close proximity to our schools. But there's more to be done. And I look forward to working with my colleagues here on the council, with Chair Albornoz, as we continue to make sure that we're increasing the safety of our children here in Montgomery County. So thank you.
Thank you. So now we're on to call of bills for final reading. Item number 6, Action Bill 20-19, Landlord-Tenant Relations Licensing of Rental Housing Fee Exemption. Our Fed Committee recommends approval with amendments. We have Councilmember Reamer. The light was different. So.
Thank you. I will turn it to the bill sponsor to make some comments in a moment, but the Fed Committee recommended this legislation with great enthusiasm. It is a bill that would waive the license fee. There's an initial fee of $581 and an annual fee of $111 for the owner of an accessory dwelling unit or apartment if the housing is occupied by an individual with disabilities. And we've heard from many families that they would like to use accessory dwelling units in this manner. And I think it is a terrific way to reach to those families and let them know that the county is working and doing everything that we can to help them meet the challenges that they're faced with. So I'll pass it back to you, Council President, again with the enthusiastic recommendation of the committee.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you to Chair Reamer and to Councilmember Jawando for your work at the committee, and for all the co-sponsors, my colleagues, on this legislation. As was noted, this really is about reducing the financial barriers, particularly for those in our community with disabilities, to be able to take advantage of the ADU changes that we have made, with the hopes that we will continue to be the inclusive community that we have strived to be. The main amendment also that was included is that if you don't actively rent out the unit, that you don't have to pay the annual fee as well, and that would include that would include having an ADU and providing the independence and dignity of an independent unit with its own kitchen, its own entrance, but that is provided for instance, an aging parent or an adult age child. As the existing standards are, if you have a rental unit that isn't being rented, or a unit that you own that isn't being rented, you don't pay the annual renewable rental fee. But for an ADU, without this change, you would be paying that bill even if you had an aging parent live in it for a period of time and then didn't rent it out. After that, you would still have to pay the annual fee. So we added that as well. I think it is in keeping with the spirit of the legislation and in keeping with the spirit of the changes that were made to the ADU program. I think the bottom line is this is an extremely modest cost to the taxpayers, but could have significant benefits to families, particularly those in our community who are most vulnerable. It's a small benefit to reduce the financial burden to those who, I think really need it, and allow us to maintain our commitment to the inclusive community and the inclusive county that we have all committed to and strive to be. So thank you to everybody for their support.
Thank you very much. Okay, I don't see any other lights, so we have a recommendation from the Fed Committee with amendments. This is a roll call.
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Jawando?
Yes.
Mr. Jawando votes yes. Mr. Hucker?
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Reamer? Yes. Mr. Reamer votes yes. Mr. Albornoz? Yes. Mr. Albornoz votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson? Yes. Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes.
Ms. Navarro votes yes.
Okay, it's unanimous. Item number 7, District Council Session, Introduction of Zoning Text Amendment 19-06, Vape Shops, co-lead sponsor Council Members Albornoz and Rice, co-sponsors Council Members Jawando, Navarro, Hucker, Reamer, Friedson, Katz, and Glass. Public hearing scheduled for November 5th at 7:30 p.m. Item B is action item on the Veers Mill Corridor Master Plan Sectional Map Amendment H-132. And Ms. Dunn is here.
Good morning. So before you have the sectional map amendment for action on the Veers Mill Master Plan. There was a public hearing that was held last week. I believe there was only one speaker who showed up for that, and she was in favor of the action, and you had also heard from her during the planning process. So as of today, we didn't have any of the correspondence with anyone with any concerns with this action. So,
all right.
Any questions?
Okay, so we have this in front of us. Do I need a motion, or has this already been moved?
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Katz, seconded by Councilmember Reamer. All right.
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Jawando?
Yes.
Mr. Jawando votes yes. Mr. Hucker?
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Reamer?
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Mr. Albornoz? Yes. Mr. Albornoz votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson?
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes.
Ms. Navarro votes yes.
Thank you. It's unanimous. Item 8 Introduction resolution to adopt Bill 29-19, Health and Sanitation, Electronic Cigarettes Distribution as a Board of Health Regulation. Co-lead sponsors, council members Albornoz and Rice. Co-sponsors, council members Joando, Navarro, Hucker, Reamer, Friedson, Katz, and Glass. Public hearing is scheduled for November 5th at 7:30 p.m. All right, with that, we, on recess until 1:30, there will be short press conference regarding a racial equity and social justice bill on the fourth floor if you'd like to join us. Thank you.